Good afternoon, everyone. So I know, sucky gig, the last presenter in a 2-day workshop, so I'll try to make it somewhat interesting. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to ask them. I'm going to be presenting on the application of appropriate technologies to support assessment planning and delivery. My name is Todd Stanley, and I'm the gifted coordinator at Pickerington Local Schools. I've been there for the last couple years, and I was the gifted coordinator at Reynoldsburg Schools for a couple of years as well. The good news about this is that I am by no means a technology expert. I'm just like the average teacher who has to learn technology as it comes out and kind of staying ahead of that game. So I don't profess myself to be a technology expert, but I certainly use a lot of technology. Because when I moved over to Pickerington, what I found interesting is that Reynoldsburg had some technology. We had laptop carts. We had smart boards. That was our big technology piece. And so when I moved to Pickerington, they're very technology heavy and very technology savvy. So for the last couple years, I've been learning quite a bit about technology, just as you will have to learn about technology throughout your careers. So. All right, so the goals for the module are to understand the role of technology in the educational world. That's the big picture. And then also to understand that role of technology specific to the enrichment of gifted students. To understand how technology can gather data. There's that, some people think that's a bad word, but it's not. It's actually a really good word. And so how does one collect data that's usable for you and that makes sense for you in order to inform instruction? To understand how technology can lead to alternative assessments, such as performance assessments. In other words, not only can you as the teacher use the technology, but your students can use that technology as well to demonstrate what they have learned and what they've mastered. And then lastly is what are strategies to keep up with technology. Technology is constantly changing, and as a result, you have to be constantly changing as well. And anyone who's been in teaching for any amount of time, you've learned that being adaptive and having adaptability is probably the #1 skill that you have to use as a teacher to adapt to your students, to adapt to the curriculum, to adapt to technology, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to read these to you because I'm going to assume everyone can read. But here are the ODE competencies and the NAGC standards. The ones I do want to focus on is the idea of 5.2, which is beginning gifted education professionals apply appropriate technologies to support instructional assessment, planning, and delivery for individuals with gifts and talents. So I'm going to show you not the answer of how to do these things, but I'm going to show you how I personally use technology in order to do these things. You may have different programs, you may have better programs, you may have better technology, and I certainly invite you to use that. I'm just going to show you what my experiences have been in the last few years using technology with gifted students. So, what is technology, since we're talking about technology? The definition of technology is the practical application of knowledge, especially in a particular area. So what that means is, this is technology. We associate technology a lot of times with computers and all that good stuff, but the truth is that technology is simply a tool that allows you to accomplish something. So for instance, when ancient man, millions of years ago, learned to use fire for the very first time, that was a breakthrough in technology. They can now cook their foods. They can now use it as a weapon to keep predators away. They can now use it to warn themselves. But figuring out how to use that technology took trial and error, lots of mistakes, lots of people probably getting burned. And so technology, all technology is, in this day and age, technology is computers and programs, but technology 100 years from now may look very different, just as it looked very different 100 years ago. So keep that in mind that, don't get too bogged down on the technology part of it. Just know that it is a tool. So I want to have a discussion here as a group. So, the question is this: how have you seen technology change in your lifetime? I'm going to give you an example to model for that, and then if anyone else would like to share some, I'd love that. So, the cell phone is the ultimate, and for me, is a huge change in technology. And let me tell you how that's changed for me. I got my first cell phone in 2001. And it wasn't like the large one there at the top there, but it was somewhere towards the top. And the reason why we got it is because I was teaching a gifted camp in Granville, Ohio, which is about 45 minutes away from my home, and my wife was pregnant and about to give birth to our first child. So having a cell phone was so we only bought it for that reason. And we said to each other, we'll only use this phone in case of emergency. It's the only time we'll use it. Okay, so don't use it for anything else. Don't call to tell me to get groceries. Don't call it only for emergencies. And that was the edict we had kind of set out. And of course, that's evolved. As phones have become more technologically advanced, it's become cheaper to use them. You know, a lot of people use phones I always go to the doctor's office and I'm amazed. People sit down and they pull out their phones and they're playing with their phones for half an hour, 45 minutes. My daughters, who are part of the, my oldest daughter who's a millennial, she can't go anywhere without playing with her phone. She's not as bad as some, but she still does a little bit more than I would like her to do. But to give you an example of how technology of the phone has changed, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and her birthday was last month, and what she wanted for her birthday was a phone, because all of her friends have phones, and so she wanted a phone too. So my wife and I were talking about it. We're like, you know what? I still think 10 years old is too young to have a phone. I don't see any purpose for having a phone. She doesn't have to get a hold of us other than to yell upstairs or downstairs to let us know what's going on. So I started talking to my daughter, and I said, okay, why do you want a phone? And she said, well, first off, I want to be able to play games. Okay, check. Second off, she said, I want to be able to listen to music. Okay. Third, I want to be able to watch my YouTube videos. And then she stopped, and I'm like, nowhere in there did she say she wanted to use it to call people, which is kind of why phones were invented. But phones have evolved from there. Now we use our phones. I mean, you can speak to this yourselves. You probably use your phone more for other things than actually calling people. Could be texting, could be checking email, could be playing Crossy Road or whatever. But the phone has evolved where it's not just I always joked when my friends would have these smartphones and they'd say, look, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. And I'd say, look, I can dial in 7 numbers and it calls someone. So phones have definitely changed. So we didn't buy my daughter a phone. We bought her an iPod Touch, which does all of those things, but it's like $300 cheaper. And she can even call us if she has wireless internet. She can still call us. So if there's an emergency, her school has wireless Wi-Fi all the time. Our house has Wi-Fi. So she can call us if she needs to. So that was a nice compromise. But that's how I've seen technology change. One example of how it's changed in my lifetime. Are there other examples of how technology has changed? People would like to share. Please, sir.
Data storage. I've been on a computer since I was 5. When I was growing up, we had 8-inch floppy disks.
Sure. Did you have the Atari 5600?
And a TRS-80. And then I did have a computer that took tapes, little audio tapes. My dad hated it because play them in his stereo.
Yeah, it probably only worked half the time too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then this floppies got smaller and then smaller, and then now we had thumb drives, and now we don't even carry any storage with us because it's all in the cloud.
Yeah. But that's an excellent example. I mean, like, my district gave me, when I went to Pickering, they gave me a brand new laptop. I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm like, I want to show a movie. And I'm like, there's no place to put in a CD. Well, you have to go online and get the movie. Why? I have a DVD. Why would I not use that? So, yeah, it's definitely changed quite a bit. Other examples? Yes, please.
Well, so as one of the oldest, we had to buy a Texas Instrument calculator in high school, but I don't think I could afford that. And now you have it all right there. Everything is there. We didn't have computers, and we used only microwaves in the hospital to heat the food for the patients. And now we have computers that do all the math, and we have microwaves in our home.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can download an app on your telephone or your phone that will do the same thing those $90 calculators can do. So yeah, so it definitely has changed. Other examples, please.
The little Oregon Trail floppy disks, or when the Apple was the Macintosh first came out.
Yeah. And it's funny, those still are real like popular to play. Like you can go online and still play those old games. Like people still love to go play those old games. I love to go on and play Galaxa, which is an old game. So yeah. Other examples? Yeah, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I grew up with my telephone, party lines.
Oh, yes, I love
Party lines.
What's party line? I've not heard that.
You didn't, well, you couldn't talk. You pick up the phone and somebody was talking, you had to wait till they hung up.
Oh, party line.
Oh, yeah, really? Oh, yeah, well, back in the-
And you cover it up so they don't hear you breathing.
yeah. And we would get on as kids and make noises and get in trouble.
Yeah, you have one?
I was just going to say typewriter.
The typewriter.
I typed all
Yeah.
my papers when I was in college. So
I love this part.
Yeah.
When I was very, very young, I touched data punch.
Just a couple years ago, right?
Yeah. No, data punch cards.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, yeah. Hey, it's funny, like I took my daughters to see Hidden Figures, and they had all those data punch cards. I'm like, what are those? I'm like, never mind. So yeah, it's too difficult to explain. So from our examples, you can see that technology has changed. No one talked about cars. I mean, the technology in cars has changed quite a bit. You know, I always found it interesting. My Aunt Mildred, who lived, she passed away like about 10 years ago, but she lived to be 100. She could tell me about a time when there weren't cars. And I'm like, really? Just like I can tell about my kids about the time when there was no internet. That just blows them away. They can't fathom that there was no internet. So now I'm going to talk about technology specifically to the classroom. And to give you another anecdote of how technology has changed over time. I know, so I graduated from OSU in 1997 with my teaching degree. And in that year, I had to take a technology class. And so our final for our technology class was taking the overhead projector and making it so that it was a perfect square on the wall rather than like a oblong shape or a rhombus or whatever. And I'm serious, that was our final. If we could do that, we had an A in technology. And so when I got into the classroom then, and they started to get rid of those Atari 5600s and started to get, you know, the Apple, the Macintosh, those things, I had to kind of run with the times. And our school didn't have any technology. So I actually had to bring in a computer that I wasn't using anymore and use that in the classroom if I wanted to use technology. Nowadays, in many cases, you walk into a school and it is very technologically rich. It's got a lot of technology, but you also have a lot of technology that people don't necessarily know how to use or don't know how to use to enrich students in the classroom. Because keep in mind, that technology is simply a tool. It's a tool that allows students to be innovative. It starts conversations, so they can watch a video and you guys can have a discussion about it. They can read an article, they can access it right away. They don't have to go to the library and access it through the microfiche anymore. So it can raise awareness of things that are going on. So lots of changes to technology in the classroom. When you're using technology in the classroom, the one thing that the piece of advice I'll definitely give you is that it should seem like you're not adding it to the classroom. So in other words, you shouldn't like do a lesson and then say, oh, we're going to do technology here. We're going to add it on here. The technology should almost be seamless. It should be so that it's embedded in the instructions so that students just use technology on a day-to-day basis. And it's not like, ooh, happy I'm using technology. It's just like a routine, like they're brushing their teeth. They know to pull out their laptops, or they know to get their iPads, or they know that we're going to get on the computer lab. And so it's really important that you embed it in the instruction rather than make it seem like something that's kind of sticking out. Because here's what I would say to you, is that if you feel like you're adding on technology, so for instance, if a student comes to me and says, Mr. Stanley, I want to do this, and I'm going to display this, and this is what I want to use. And I'll say to him, well, couldn't you do that on a poster and be just as effective, if not more? And he's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, then do the poster. Okay, so you don't use technology for technology's sake. Use technology because it's enhancing the lesson, because it's teaching them a skill maybe you want them to learn, and so on and so forth. So the use of online programs, and I'm sure that many of you use various online programs. I'm just going to share the ones that I have used in the past. So in my district, we use Study Island and Moby Max. And the reason why we use that with the gift, we have a gifted magnet team of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And we have gifted intervention specialists teaching all those classes. And what we found is our district has STAR. If anyone else has STAR in here, sorry about that. But what we found with STAR is that STAR topped out really quick. So our kids would take the pre-assessment at the very beginning of the year, and they would have a 99 plus. They were above the 99th percentile. And it's like, well, that doesn't really help us any to know that they're there at the beginning of the year. How are we going to show growth? And so we purchased Study Island and and got MobiMax, which is free, specifically for our gifted students, because we found on those assessments there was stretch. They could show growth. They could show what they had learned. And there are various other programs out there as well. But what I would say to you is make sure, even if your district is using a program, make sure it's going to be useful. Because we got to the point where we were taking STAR tests and just throwing the data away. It didn't help us at all. We were wasting kids' time. We were wasting teacher time. And so I talked to the principal, and I said, we want to use these instead. And she's like, great, they don't need to take STAR anymore. Let's not waste their time anymore. So that would just be one example of how that looks. And so we use this information for various things. So first off is as a starting point. What you should not do is just put a kid on Study Island and say, I'm enriching them. The Study Island or whatever program you decide to use is a starting point. It shows you where the student's at. And so as a teacher, you now know where you can take them, where they're capable of going. And you guys know, if anyone in here at all has ever taught in a gifted classroom, you know that there's just as much differentiation in a gifted classroom as there is in a regular classroom with a whole spectrum of students. Because you have that kid who has an SAI of 145, and you have that kid who's got an SAI of 126. And that's a big gap. So that's the same as having a kid who's a 126 and a 107. I probably did my math wrong there, but which is a big difference. So you have to differentiate, so you have to see where they're at. So using it as a pre-assessment and then determining where can I take kids from here. It's funny, the kids themselves, we also have a program, and kids would take it and they pre-assess and they get 100%. Then the teacher said, when you're trying to compare it to English, it doesn't always match up. And so when we first started doing TBTs, we really struggled to find meaningful data that was helpful to the entire team. And so what we did instead was we decided to focus on 21st century skills based on the habits of learning, or habits of mind, if you've ever heard of the habits of mind. And so what we did was we would have, because we had 3 TBTs a year, and so what we would do is we'd say, okay, this cycle's TBT is going to be based on accuracy, which is one of the habits of mind. And we are going to give a pre-assessment on what accuracy is. Then we're going to see where the students are. Then we're going to teach them what accuracy is in the classroom in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So the message is consistent across the board. And then we'll give them a post-test to see if they have grown. And then, so what we did is, since kids come into the program as 4th graders and they're in 4th, 5th, and 6th, when those 4th graders go to 5th grade, then they're getting 3 new skills that everyone is doing. And when they go to 6th grade, there's basically 9 TBT cycle through the 3 years, so that a student going through the 3 years is going to have new skills every year. And we can guarantee that those kids are going to get those 21st century skills. Because as you guys know, our gifted students, some of them are excellent at content. They get it really easily. But it's those life skills, those people skills that they lack, the social emotional aspect that we have to work with. So this was our TBT. So we were focusing in on collaboration skills, to be specific. And so we gave them a pretest. And the pretest that we did was from a program called Illuminate. So Illuminate is just a test-making program. So any test-making program that you have, you can use. So what we did was we created a pre-assessment. We worked together as a team to create it. And so the pre-assessment for collaboration looked like this. This is what the data looked like. So we gave them the pre-assessment. It was 10 questions, and you can see some. I'll show you an example of some of the questions. So here's like our first question was, come on, technology is great as long as it's working. So why is it important while collaborating to understand your role and understand the expectations of the group? And so we asked students that cold. They may have never been exposed to that, but we asked them that, and the answer would have been, so it's clear what it is that you need to do. Now, you know gifted kids, they make arguments for the other three. They'll say, well, it could be this one, it could be this one, it could be this one. But we always told them which is the best answer out of those. All of them may be correct, but only one really stands out as the best. Because we didn't want to make it like so obvious, like why is it important to collaborate? Well, it's not important. You know, that wouldn't be a feasible answer. So we created distractors that were a little challenging for them to figure out. So this is the data that we pulled from this. And what you see here is red means that they missed the boat completely. Yellow means they got it somewhat, but could be doing better. Green means that they met the benchmark that we set. And then blue is that they are advanced. You can see the blue is very small in this data. And the yellow is a good majority. So 108 out of the 157 kids who took it scored there. And so the reason why I like Illuminate is because then it breaks it down. I'm sorry, 153 students. It shows what were the poorest questions. So I can go to this one, and this question says, of the following alternatives, identify which would be the most appropriate for a group whose members may need more structure. And so what we started to find is that a majority of kids were not getting that one correct. So we had to teach them that. This is we're gathering information. Illuminate also does it by subgroups. So you can see here, we have our Asian population was in the green, but our Hispanic population, now keep in mind there's only 2 students, so if one student messes up, it throws the whole thing off, but regardless. But we have our social economically disadvantaged, which are 19 students who are not performing well, and so on and so forth. So it helped us to break down our subgroups, which we showed on our Gateway TBT form. So here's our students with disability, our ELL, gifted, all of them are gifted, our minorities, and our economically disadvantaged. From that, we analyzed the data, and we said, what were their strengths? So 4th grade specifically said they were able to list an important rationale for collaboration as well as the best reason for learning the skill for collaboration. So that's something they did really well. What's something they needed to work on? The students struggle with knowing the important aspects of successful collaboration. The students have not had sufficient time to engage in collaboration, therefore they have not had adequate opportunities. So after we gave this pre-assessment, our 4th grade teachers started putting kids in groups more and started being more purposeful about that. They just didn't throw them into groups. They taught them about what it is to collaborate and what does good collaboration look like and what does not so good collaboration look like. And so you all know in your line of work, being able to collaborate with someone is a very important skill. So if we can teach them in the 4th grade how to collaborate, then that's a skill that's going to last them the rest of their lives. And so that's why we focused on these 21st century skills. So then we talked about what are specific intervention strategies that we were going to do. So in grade 4, teachers were going to model and engage students in role play to demonstrate appropriate behaviors to support successful collaboration experiences. Teachers will provide multiple opportunities for the students to practice these skills through research projects, group assignments, and paired activities. The successful completion of these tasks will be predicated upon well-developed collaboration strategies. So they just had them collaborate more, okay? But this is informing the instruction. This is driving the instruction, this data. If we had given this test and kids were nailing collaboration, we might not be focusing on it as much. But we found that there were issues with the collaboration. So we worked with students for about 4 weeks, and then we gave them a post-assessment. And so a post-assessment wasn't the exact same test. We created a different post-assessment. It asked similar questions, but it did not ask the exact same questions that had been asked on the other one. We would take the question and maybe take the answer and put it in the question and take the question and put it in the answer. But it was essentially the same material. It just was in a different form. And so when we gave the post-assessment, what we found, we don't have any red anymore. And we have very little, we don't have as much of the yellow. We have a majority in the benchmarked, and we have 17 where we had 1 before. We had 17 in the advanced. And so we felt like we had a successful round of TBT because almost 70% of our kids had mastered it. Now, they had set the goal of 80% mastery. So our teachers were not satisfied with that. So it doesn't mean they stopped teaching collaboration for the rest of the year. They knew it was something they needed to work on for the rest of the year. And so, again, this showed us the questions that they struggled with. Our subgroups look a lot better than they did before. We still have the Hispanic subgroup. Again, if you have only 2 people to work from and only 2 people in the ELL, so that, that data can be skewed. And so we did this in order to inform instruction, and this drove our instruction. So I would walk into classrooms for walkthroughs, and I would see vocabulary on the board. I would see posters that espouse collaboration. I would see, that being purposeful about the teaching of that skill, rather than just assuming kids know how to do this, because we all know that they don't. We all know that adults sometimes don't know how to collaborate. So that's what we focused on. But this was predicated by using the technology and using the data that this technology created. All right. So, sorry. Online identification of gifted. So there are some assessments that, we are in the state of Ohio, we have state-approved tests that we must give students in order to identify them as gifted. There are other states that don't have those state-approved tests. Like I was at the Kentucky Association for Gifted Education, or CAGE, as they call it, and they were saying, we can create local norms. So we set the bar where kids are, and so if you go to one district, a kid is gifted. If that kid goes to another district, they may not be gifted, and so on and so forth. And I thought that was a little confusing in that, because they do have a transient population in Kentucky. And they were telling me, there's a lot of kids that move around. It's like, well, then why don't you have a consistency with that? But there are programs such as MAP, COGAT, OLSAT, and NAGLIERI 2, which do have online identification of gifted. And I know when Colleen Boyle, who you met, and is the Columbus gifted coordinator, when they give their second graders the MAP, they do it online. Some people are like, well, no, second graders can't do technology yet. So we want to make sure second graders can do technology better than we can. They've been doing it since they were born. To show you another example of how technology advanced is this gentleman who I coach with. He said, I sat down with my kid and I had a book, or with my grandchild and I had a book, and they tried to swipe the book rather than turn the page because they were so used to reading on a Kindle. And so the point being is that these kids have had technology thrust into their hands literally from birth, unless they're Amish. They have had that experience. And so kids do know how to do online testing. Now, you do need to make sure that you are exposing them to that, so when they go to take their online testing in the air and things of that nature, that they're familiar with that. So, MAP specifically whose districts in here use MAP? So, a decent amount. So, my district does not. So, we use the old-fashioned pencil to paper, Terra Novas and Otis Lennons and all that good stuff. But I would like to get us into the 21st century and to use something like MAP. So MAP, the nice thing about MAP is it creates instant data for you to use. So kid takes a test. We have Hazel's results. Don't worry, Hazel's not a real student. This is from their website. It's a dummy one. But it shows mathematics and reading where they're progressing, where their percentile range is, and what grade level that they're at. So also, a nice thing about MAP or any of these programs is with the data it creates is if you learn how to read the reports and use the reports, then you can find information that's going to be helpful for you. So for instance, here is a quadrant chart that shows a high achievement, high growth, high achievement, low growth, low achievement, low growth, and low achievement, high growth. Well, if you're teaching a group of gifted students, you would want the kids in the green, a majority of them in the green. And if you had some kids over here in the pink, that would be problematic. And you would want to say, why is that? And start to analyze that. Not with technology, but just with good old-fashioned, asking questions. Why is the student, maybe the student didn't take their time on the test. Or maybe they were feeling sick that day. Or maybe there's an explanation to why. Or maybe they just don't know the material. And you need to go back and make sure that they have that material. So, but the idea of collecting data is not to have data for data's sake. The idea is that when you collect data, it informs the instruction. Otherwise, why collect it? I mean, I know when we go into Illuminate, Illuminate can generate like 30 reports if you want. But there's only 2 that are really useful, so they're the only 2 we look at. And so you want to make sure that the data is useful to you. And you can use this data to help you write written education plans. So this is what we did, where we gave pre-assessments with the Study Island and the Moby Max. And from that, we created goals for students' written education plans. So here's an example. This is a dummy one again, so don't think I'm I'm not violating any HIPAA violations here. So during the 2016-2017 school year, the student will master concepts of fractions and decimals, and by interpreting and computing quotients of fractions, solve word problems, yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. But we just didn't put this for every kid. This kid specifically struggled with that on the pre-assessment. And so that's why we set it as their goal. Now, I know you say it's a written education plan. We're supposed to be, we're getting gifted kids enriched. We're supposed to be giving not just the basics, but we're supposed to be doing more. And so, as a result, there are some kids that are going to have issues, or they maybe need to be enriched even more. Maybe they're getting it at a basic level, but you want them to get it at a higher level. So, you can use technology to write WEPs. In our district, we use Same Goal IEP Anywhere to write WEPs. And the reason I like Same Goal IEP Anywhere for a couple of reasons. First off, it's easy to train people how to write WEPs using it. It's fairly user-friendly. And since I've been in the district, when I was in Reynoldsburg, I wrote every WEP in the district because I had all the kids in class. And so I would write their WEPs because I also was a part-time teacher, part-time district coordinator, and they were being serviced. They were in my class, so I knew them. So I wrote all the WEPs. When I got to Pickerington, the gifted population was a little larger, and it was dispersed amongst teachers, and I didn't know the students anymore. And so I had to start to build capacity, and I had to train teachers on how to write WEPs. And so using the Same Goal IEP Anywhere was very helpful for me because it works with your EMIS system. It all this stuff like putting in the addresses, all that stuff is all done for you. And I'll show you an example of Same Goal IEP Anywhere. This is, again, not a real student, but one I made up. You can tell she's made up because she has my last name. All right. So here's this child's written education plan. Pre-populated all their information. And so the teacher so we would give interest surveys at the beginning of the year so that we could fill in the student interest and learning styles. In this case, Abby's very artistic and expresses herself through various forms of art, including drawing, painting, sculpture, and crafts. So that's specific to that student. You should not just do a blanket statement for all students. It should be specific to those students. Just like when you're writing an IEP, it's specific to what they need to work on. When you're writing a WEP, you should focus on what their strengths are and maybe what they need to work on as well. And so for this student, 2 goals were created. The first one was a math goal. And in this case, Abby struggles with word problems. So she needs to work on determining what information she will need and what operation or operations must be used to solve the problem. So one way you can write a WEP goal is something they need to work on because they're deficient in that, or they're having issues, or they're having problems. This student is part of a Math Plus program. It's a pull-out program. So it's listed as a gifted resource room with a gifted intervention specialist. In Pickerington, we also cluster kids in language arts. And so here's Abby's language arts goal. Abby's a strong reader and writer. Her comprehension is good, as evidenced by her AR score. So she's doing it. So how can we challenge her further? So our goal was would like to see Abby challenge herself by reading material 2 grades above level. So what they found when they worked with Abby is that she was reading stuff that was either at or even below grade level. So if she's that strong a reader, she's that strong in comprehension, then we should be challenging her by challenging her with more difficult books. So this was not part of a pull-out program. This is just in the regular classroom. And so it's marked as thus, where you have the regular educational class taught by a general education teacher. And so does anyone in here use IEP Anywhere for their WEPs? So just a few people. And I'm not trying to sell. I don't get a kickback from IEP Anywhere. I just know that when I used it, it was very user-friendly. When I was at Reynoldsburg, we used like Microsoft Excel, and like it was really time-consuming and really difficult. But what I find is by using a program like this, it's easy to train others how to write WEPs. And so again, building that capacity. So in Pickerington, where we started having 6 people were writing WEPs, now we're up to about 25 people who are writing WEPs. And so each time I train them using this technology. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about blended learning. Blended learning is one of those buzzwords that is used quite a bit, especially recently. So blended learning is basically an educational program that combines online digital media with traditional classroom methods. So all that means is you're using technology to help them learn. We call it blended learning. And it's really interesting because when we started first to use blended learning in Reynoldsburg, our principal called us together in a staff meeting, and he said, we have bought a program for you guys that you're to use with students. And you're to have them on this program for 30 minutes a day. And for every day, and that will be their blended learning. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is not helpful for my kids at all. This information is very, lower level. There's not many higher level thinking questions. This is going to be a waste of our time. And so as I started to look at the definition of blended learning, what I found was I was already doing blended learning in the classroom. I just wasn't calling it blended learning. And so in my classroom, I used a lot of project-based learning. And so here's an example of one of them. So this was a Mesopotamia project that we did. And so in this project, students became an expert on a specific aspect of culture, either in Mesopotamia, India, or China. So they went and they became the expert. They did research using the internet. And they collected that research either by writing it by hand or putting it in a Google Doc or putting it in a Microsoft Word. But they were using technology. I didn't purposely say you have to use technology. They could have gotten a book. But students tend to go towards the technology, which is fine. The technology I did want to teach them, the skill I did want them to know, was creating their own podcast. And the reason why I specifically chose creating their own podcast was because a podcast is an audio presentation. So a lot of times as presenters, we use a lot of visual aspects to our presentation. And so there's an art form of an audio presentation and a visual presentation. They're very different. And so I wanted kids to kind of think about this differently and figure out what's the best way that I can communicate by speaking. I was trying to teach them speaking skills using the podcast and communicating effectively verbally. And so they used recording devices. They found, I didn't tell them how to do the podcast. What we did was we looked at examples of exemplars for a podcast. So we watched some podcasts from various places. And we talked about it after. We just said, is this a good example or a bad example? Why do you think it is? Why do you think it's not? And they used that. And then I told them, just record it any way you want. And so some kids would take their iPad and they would put the video on and they'd put a pillow over the camera and just record what they were saying there. And so it would have a black screen and it would be a podcast. Other kids would venture out onto the internet and find programs where they could create their own podcast. And so I try not to be too particular about what technology they need to use, just what they have to do. And so then kids are very good about going out and finding their own technology. So what I found is that I was already doing blended learning in my classroom because I did use technology quite a bit, not necessarily in the teaching of them, but in the student products that kids were creating. And it all started when I was my second year of teaching. I had this student named Dustin. And Dustin was the next Steven Spielberg. This was 1998, so it was a while ago. And so whenever we had a project, I'd say, okay, you're going to turn in an essay. You're going to turn in this. You're going to turn in, a research paper or whatever. Kind of boring products. And then, so Dustin would come up to me and say, Mr. Stanley, can I make a film about what I'm learning? And, have a script and have actors. And I'm like, why not? You can. So he would make these films and then he turned them in as his work because that was something that he was skilled at. He had the technological know-how how to do that. And so as a result, I started to give kids more options in the classroom. So when you're presenting, you can present any way you want. You can use technology. You cannot use technology. It's totally up to you. Most kids go to technology. And what I found very ironic, by the way, is I would tell students, okay, you're going to do a presentation on what you learned. You can do the presentation any way you want to. And they would say, all right. And then they would get up there and they always complained when I gave PowerPoint presentations and spoke at them for hours at a time. And lo and behold, what do? They get up in front of the class and they gave PowerPoint presentations where they spoke at everyone. So I needed to show them exemplars of what good presentations look like and what are alternatives, but allow them to explore as well. What blended learning should not be. It should not be what you see in the picture here. It should not be putting kids in cubicles and having them do online programs, and that's how they're getting their learning. And saying we're enriching them because we're giving them an enriched program. That's definitely not the way it should look. And I'll share a story with you. I have a student who, as a fifth grader, had completed, as a fourth grader, had completed 8th grade math, was done with 8th grade math as a fourth grader. And so talked with the parents, met with the parents. We wanted to challenge the student. And so in 5th grade, he wanted to take algebra. The problem is we don't have any algebra teachers at the middle school. We don't have any algebra teachers at the middle school. So so I said, well, we can bus them over to the school. We can do it that way. And they're like, no, I don't want my 5th grader with, juniors in high school, hearing juniors in high school's conversations. So what we arrived at was a program called APEX. And APEX is a program used at our community school. So what would happen is kids, when they had to take algebra, they sat down in front of a computer and they learned algebra from the computer. The teacher that was in the classroom is not really a teacher. They were just a body that was monitoring to make sure that they were staying on task, but they didn't have any math skills necessary to be able to help that student. And so this student took algebra as a 5th grader online, and with pretty good results. I think he ended up with an 89% in the class. So pretty good results. So 6th grade year comes around, and we're faced with the same problem. So we gave him APEX geometry, and this is where we started to notice some. So first off, he finished it by December, the entire year, 2 semesters worth of work. He finished by December. And so one thing was finding things for him to do. And so we found enrichment activities like math counts and going deeper into problems and so on and so forth. But what we found, and I'm no math expert, so I had a math expert that came down and worked with Drew and had conversations with me about his progress. But anyways, so what we found was that when he went to go take his end-of-year exam, which he couldn't take until May, is that he was struggling with the geometry, with retaining the geometry. Because the program is really good about teaching you the basics, but it wasn't good about going into depth. It wasn't good about showing you that enduring understanding. And what we also found was that Drew would take a problem, and he was very mathematically inclined. He was brilliant. And so when he was faced with a problem, he would invent his own way to solve it that would be correct. That wasn't maybe your typical way to do that. However, this invented way of doing the math took him a half hour to do it when he could have had it done in 5 minutes, just using something that he had been taught. So what I learned from this is that you can't just plop a kid down in front of a computer and expect them to learn that way. There has to be human interaction. I mean, the one thing that helped him was me sitting him down with this math expert and having conversations once a week so that he could ask questions and things of that nature. But it definitely was not the way to go about it. And I know some districts are saying, we're going to meet the needs of our gifted kids by putting them on programs. It's not the right model. And this is called an online driver model. It is definitely not the best model for challenging kids. What it is good for, actually, is for credit recovery. So kids who are struggling to just get the basics, that's why a lot of community schools use Apex, is that it will give them credit recovery so they can take the class and graduate high school. They'll never use that information ever again in their lives. And so, but regardless, they're getting the information to take that class. So how blended learning should look. There are various ways it should look. One way is station rotation. So station rotation is simply having a classroom where you don't have the teacher up in front of the class teaching. There are 4 or 5 stations throughout the class. And kids then go to the station and they develop mastery. And if they get it quick, they can go to another station. If they get that one, they can go to, and they self-monitor themselves. They go, and there's a checklist or like a checkpoint. Are they getting it? And so they move through that. And so what this does, and I saw this used in a math classroom this year, a 6th grade math class. And what this does is it allows you as the teacher to work one-on-one with students. Because a lot of times we have 30 to 32 faces out there, and we're teaching to the faces. We're not teaching to the individual kids because we're doing in front of the classroom instruction. So what the blended learning, the station rotation allows you to do is to have conversations with kids, to see what are they getting, and if they're getting it really easily, to push them to that next level. And so I'll show you an example of what it looked like in her classroom. So she had every single unit on the internet, and so kids would start out and they would go to videos, and they would watch a video. There was a video there that has to do with the idea, and here's an interactive activity. But basically what she told me, she said, look, I can sit up there and tell them the vocabulary that they need to know and go over the concept with them. But in today's day and age, when kids want to know something, they go onto YouTube. My daughter wanted to know how to make a fidget spinner. And so she went on YouTube and installed a program, and then voila, a day later she'd create her own fidget spinner. That's kind of how kids are very adept at learning on their own. And so if you provide them with the resources, those resources will do a much better job of teaching the basic concept than if you're talking at 30 heads. So they can rewind and listen to it again, whatever, but they can move at their own pace. And so she would have videos for them to watch. That would be one station. She would then do practice sessions with them where they would take what they learn and then, demonstrate mastery. And so here's an example of how they would do that. And then summarize today's lesson is something I always like that she put in there, which is that students in their own words had to summarize what they learned. And so she would see, did they get it? Did they not get it? What did they put in their summary? Did they show me that they know it? And then she would have, this was the document that she would use with them. And so she had 4 different stations. One was called M, which stood for math fluency. One was A, which was at your seat. One was T, which is take it to the next level, so really challenging those kids. And H was the hands-on. So kids always had to start here at the math fluency just to make sure they got the basics. And then they took it a little step further. At the at your seat, they would delve into a little bit deeper. And if they can handle that, they could move on to the T, which was taking it to the next level. And if they got that, they could move on to the H. So she scaffolded the lesson so that if a kid needed to spend this entire station rotation in M, they could do that. And so they would get that basic. And if they didn't get that basic information, they could go talk with her. She had a station where she was seated at a desk, and she could have conversations with them. And then she scaffolded up and up and up. So what was amazing about going into her classroom is kids differentiated for themselves rather than the teacher having to differentiate. So she created the stations, and then kids were like, I mastered this here, I'm going to this one. And they worked at their own self-pace. And occasionally there would be a kid that would get behind or whatever, and then she just worked with that student individually. Or if a kid wasn't you know, the one roadblock in this, if a kid isn't someone who takes a lot of initiative, so they'll find themselves getting behind as well, and so she would have to remind them to get going on that. So that is an example of a station rotation. I've seen it in English classes as well, where kids are doing different stations. The thing about station rotation I do want to caution you on is that if you're truly differentiating it, when kids go to a station, there should be differentiation even within that. So if a kid they go to the hands-on, and there's one activity that is going to show mastery, but they already know how to do that, do you have another one on hand in order for them to go to that next level? You always want to be pushing them. She put all of her lessons online, and parents could go to it, and students could go to it, so parents saw what they were doing, and so on and so forth. The one thing I will caution you on, the lesson that we learned, was that she started station rotations and didn't inform parents what station rotation looked like and what was the purpose for it. And so we had a lot of parents, which I find this just so ironic, parents saying, well, they're not bringing home worksheets, or she's not standing in front of the class talking to them like you should be in a math class. And it's like, well, you know, do you want to use a cell phone that's 20 years old, or do you want to advance your thinking? And so she just was using a more advanced way to teach these kids. And so what we did was we brought the parents in, and we had a training session with them where students were stationed at the different stations, and the parents rotated through, and they saw what it was like. And all of a sudden, they understood. Because the reality is, when parents struggle with things, it's usually things they don't understand. Not because of their own fault. They've just not been informed. So as a teacher, if you're going to do something like this, you want to make sure you inform parents. When I did projects for the very first time, I let parents know, this is what your kid will be bringing home. They will not be bringing home worksheets for me. They will not be bringing home a textbook. We're going to be doing projects, and this is what this is going to look like. So you have to train those parents in order to, if you're going to do something like this. It will be much smoother if you do train your parents. And there's her math worksheet. Another example is a flipped classroom. So I found that, you know, I was a social studies teacher, so I would give a lecture, and kids would take notes, and then we would do an activity after the lecture. But what you can do with a flipped classroom is, instead of wasting class time doing that presentation, you simply record what it is that you wanted them to learn, and they watch that for homework. So here's an example of a flipped classroom. I'm going to begin my sound. So
look like, and as we progress through this video, you will be filling in each box. The top box is filled in for you, and again, infinitives are what we call verbals that act like adjectives, adverbs, and nouns. A verbal is a form of a verb. So again, as we're progressing through this video, you'll be filling in your notes, and you'll get a better understanding of what you need to put in each box as we progress.
So she used a program called Screencastify. It's light because it's free. So she used the free version of it. And she would record her presentations and then assign them for homework. So kids were expected to go home and watch this 10-minute presentation and then come in the next day ready to discuss it. And so now what she was doing is she was making it so that she wasn't wasting class time, kids having to listen to her. They could do that in their own time at home. And so kids could do it in the comfort of their own home, and they would come in with this information filled out and ready to go to that next level. So flipped classroom is definitely one way to be more efficient in your classroom. So and there's the flipped classroom. One-to-one. Is there anyone from a district here who is one-to-one at this point? So a few, okay. So we just went one-to-one last year. And what I found really interesting about going one-to-one, so basically one-to-one is every student has a device. So, and for all of our students from 5th grade to 12th grade have a Chromebook that they're given at the very beginning of the year, that's theirs. every kindergarten through fourth grader is given an iPad. And so they have their own, technology that they can access. Here's the thing that we struggled with, though, is that we did this initiative and we had a lot of teachers that weren't savvy enough with technology to figure out how to use it effectively to where they were, using it to embedding it in their classroom. They were just using it, like they would say, well, what are you doing with your Chromebooks? And they said, well, we're using it as a word processor. Well, there's so many other things that you could be doing with that as well. So one thing I would caution is if your district has gone one-to-one or is planning to go one-to-one, you definitely want to have a plan of how you're going to educate teachers of what that looks like. So some teachers will be very inventive and take the initiative and learn themselves how to do that, and they'll create great things like the flipped classroom, or not the flipped classroom, the station rotations. That was totally created by that teacher. She just went online, found examples of it, and decided to use that. Other teachers will maybe need a little guidance. So what we did in our district was we hired coaches to come in from outside and teach how to use station rotations or how to embed technology into your learning. And so what we found was it was well worth the investment because we wanted to make sure that students were using this technology to enrich their learning, not just as a means to have something cool to do. So, and then this next year, we had 2 technology coordinators at our district office, and next year we'll have 5. So we'll have one for each level. So there'll be an elementary, a middle school, junior high, and high school, and then one who's overseeing them. But you'll want to encourage your district to invest in that, or make sure that that you could use collaboration groups where teachers who do get it teach those who maybe don't. So because you'll have people in your buildings that will be very adept at technology. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to, you don't have to break, just stay at the tables that you're at. And what I'm going to ask you to have a small group discussion. And this is what I want you to discuss. If your district is one-to-one, or imagine your district is going one-to-one, what are some effective ways technology can be used in the classroom? So take about 5 minutes to talk about that at your table, and then we'll report out on what that might look like. So share ideas of what you've seen. I knocked this off at one point. Is it on okay? Yep. All right. All right. That is awesome. I love that. I have until 4:45, right? 4:45? Okay, just want to make sure I'm doing my time right. Yeah.
Would you be able to, on your slides, every link I've tried to click on, and I have to request permission?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because I was like,
If you send me an email, I'll be happy to.
okay,
So
well,
I'll,
I did request.
oh, if you
permission,
requested,
so if
perfect.
it
Excellent.
pops up,
I will definitely do that. So, yep.
like especially the math station form. I thought
Yeah, yeah.
that would be good.
Oh, yeah, it's an excellent. Now, I will definitely give you permission for that. Uh-huh. Take another minute or so to share any burning thing that you want to share or to wrap up your conversations. All right, hopefully everyone got to share. What I'm going to ask is for a few groups to share out maybe something you heard that was interesting or something that your district already does that you'd like to share.
Would anyone like to share on that who hasn't shared previously? Bueller? Anyone? Yes.
We have a lot of Chromebooks, but we aren't one-to-one. But I use Google Classroom a lot.
How do you use it?
For like putting links on there and kind of like that's the direction. Whenever we go on the computer, they log in and they go straight to Google Classroom.
Okay, yeah.
So they have that routine of where to go, and then like give the description of what I want them to do. It tells them click on this link. Then when you're done, you know, do quizzes on here and do some informative practice. And I also use Edge Elastic a lot for assessments.
Okay.
That's awesome.
What about Edge Elastic makes you think of?
I'm math, so
Okay.
I love all the math tools it has.
Okay, great.
It's with it. Resembles tests.
Okay. So you're giving them good assessment practice. That's excellent. Yeah, and I'll show an example of Google Classroom as we go along. Anyone else want to share some things that they're doing, or you got to do some great things in your districts? I know you
I
are.
don't know if this counts, but it's for me, it's been reducing the amount of paper
Yeah.
in the classroom. So it's effective for me as far as my use of time, because like I have used a site called EdSite, and then you can also use it as a test simulator, and you can write questions that simulate their questions just like she does. And the same thing with Google Classroom. I present give them the projects on there, and they also submit their project through Google Classroom, so it just cuts down on the amount of paper shot.
Yeah, we took all the printing privileges away from students. Like no one can print, no students can print. Sometimes some teachers can't figure it out either. But yeah, but yeah, it definitely does cut down on the amount of paper, and you know, cuts down on the amount of paper you have to take home. So you can just get online and access something and make comments directly on their paper, and I'll show an example of that. Anything else? Yes, please.
Well, I use Google Classroom quite often as well, and one of the features that I really like on it is the ability that you can communicate with the parents right through there.
Yep.
Like I have it set up so, or I ask my parents to set their end up so that once a week they're getting a report that says, hey, your kid doesn't have 2 of these assignments turned in, and it automatically does it. So I'm not constantly getting emails and phone calls from parents when grades are poor or whatever. It's all there.
Yeah. And it's always, anytime you can cut down on, you know, parent emails, just by informing them is always a good thing. So, all right. I did want to show an example of Google Classroom, which was mentioned a couple of times. So, Google Classroom, I use Google Classroom because I no longer have a class of my own. But what I do is I do teach a lot of enrichment activities at different schools. So I'll go to one school and do a chess club. I'll go to another school and do a gaming club. I'll go to yet another school and do Power of the Pen. So because I'm only seeing them for 1 hour every other week, I wanted to have a method of being able to communicate with them. And so I had my Google Classroom set up where an invited student, so here's an example. I did an Invention League, which is formerly Invention Convention. at Sycamore Creek Elementary. I did it with first, second, third, and fourth graders. And because I was only going to be meeting with them every other week, I wanted to make sure they had a place to go. If they were absent, I didn't want them to be 2 weeks behind. So what I did was I put all the lessons on here. So we started out with what was Invention League. Students could watch a video if they wanted to. Or sorry, go to the website. They could download a piece of paper that I handed out to everyone. So when they say, I lost my piece of paper, say, well, you can just print it up yourself. And I had videos on here. So starting your adventures, and this was not a video, but this was their adventures journal. So many kids lost their adventures journal that I just threw it on there so they could print it up themselves, or they could fill it out there. I had videos such as this trifold setup. So I flipped the classroom in that I gave a presentation.
Yes, due to technology, I get to teach you even when I'm not here. So what I'm going to give you a brief lesson on is how to do your presentation for your invention convention.
So that was just a way for me. I was going to be absent one week, and I wanted to make sure the message got across to them like I wanted it to. So I filmed this, and then the person that was regulating the class just showed this to them. And kids, if they missed, could go and see what they had missed. I had students that said, you know what, I felt bad for them. They're like, we watched your thing like 10 times to help us how to do when we would forget how to do it, we would look at that. So kids could also use it as a resource. And so the other thing I like about it is not only can you communicate with parents, like you said, you can communicate with kids. So kids would send me direct emails, and they would say, just pop up on my email, are we going to be there at the first convention? And then I would say the due dates, so on and so forth. So I could have conversations with students who I wasn't seeing because I wasn't in the building all the time. So if you have a pull-out program where you're not seeing kids every day, or even if you do see kids every day, it's a nice way to communicate with kids. It's a nice way to organize things. Another example, I did Future City Builders at one building. And so in order to get into Future City Builders, kids had to write an essay in order to, because we only had so many spots. And so kids would they would submit their essays right here in the Google Classroom. And so part of that was a responsibility thing. If the kid really wanted to be in Future City Builders, they would go online. They would go on to Google Classroom and write the essay. But when you told some kids, "Hey, go in Google Classroom," they'd be like, "Oh, well, that's too much work." I'd be like, "I don't want you in Future City Builders anyways, if that's too much work for you." So it vetted out students. So I showed you the example of the Invention League because we only met once a week. Here's a teacher that used her Google Classroom. She had a gifted pull-out every day, but she used it to post her lessons. So I'll show you what it looked like. So kids went to this, and it had the presentation on what they were going to be doing in Google Classroom. So it would have what the challenge was. It would link it to STEM. Tell them what they need to do research-wise. Give them specific notes. So it gave them sites to go to kind of guide them in the right direction, because you don't want them to going to sites that aren't helpful. Again, research, and then their imagine part. So showed examples of catapults kids could be creating, how they plan, and so on and so forth. And it gives a due date. So November 1st, she wanted to do it around Halloween. So they did their pumpkin chunking. And then here was the standards that she linked to it. And
so what she did, she'd have a video like this to introduce it.
Simple machine calls a lot of...
So I'll show you how the
other facet to an
pumpkin chunk.
The twisting, or torsion, is just tension applied in a rotating direction instead of straight up and down. And we all know what happens from there. But please don't try this at home unless you have a scale model or something.
So it gave them a basic idea of it. And this was with 3rd and 4th graders, by the way. So this was not with high school students. This was 3rd and 4th graders. And so they created some really cool, I went and watched their pumpkin chunking day on November 1st. It was really cool. They were some kids, and what was really interesting is that it allowed kids to make mistakes during the process and then learn from those and fix them. So they would be like, well, this didn't work as well as I wanted to in this trial. What can we do to make it better? Maybe we should make the rubber band tighter, or maybe we should use another material. Or one group didn't realize that when their thing would shoot, it actually would get stuck. And so they figured out a way to unstick that. Another way that you can do use technology is I love to do the egg drop challenge with kids, which is basically you got to take an egg and you got to drop it a certain amount using only certain materials. And so students would use technology to figure out because I did this with 3rd and 4th graders, and kids would be like, well, they didn't know. I mean, they would say, well, I would give them a balloon. They'd say, well, I'll blow it up and it will just float. Like, no. Got to have helium in it for that to happen. Sorry. And so, some kids have, like, I noticed this with Invention League, that kids have grandiose ideas that maybe aren't realistic. So, and sometimes they have grandiose ideas that they just need to, refine and whatnot. So, having technology for them to be able to look at examples of egg drop challenges. And so, I would post a video like this, where they could see what kids had done. So, and various things of that nature. So, student product. So, the way I use technology in my classroom, especially when I had a classroom, was in student product. So, I was not a big fan of grading papers. I wanted to have a lot of performance assessments where I used rubrics, and kids would do projects. And rather than me having to grade, 30 essays that are all given the exact same answer, I had a lot of variety in this. And so, kids use technology all over the place. So with the oral presentations, sometimes they would record it. When they had interviews with people, they would actually film the interview that they had with someone, or they would reenact the interview. If you had students that had an exhibition, they would find some cool program to exhibit what they had learned. I had students that for their presentations were like, you know what, I don't like PowerPoint. I'm going to try something different. So some students would come in with Prezi and try different forms there. And so there are different things that you can do with student product and performance assessment. So here's an example of a student product that used technology. So these are 2 students of mine who did a... Here's 2 examples. Here's a student book trailer that they created. That was done by a 5th grader. So they found a program online, and there were different students used different programs. I had a couple that had like watermarks across them because they were in the trial. You don't have to buy a program necessarily. You can use the trial versions to do these things. So this was a book trailer where the kid summarized the book. Here was a group that was doing their invention league. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to look at their presentation and practice it. So we filmed it. That's how they use the technology. Aren't they adorable?
So we are going to fix that problem for us and you guys. So the Bright Burner is a portable marshmallow machine that solves the problem of marshmallow slime sticks.
And so we would record that, and then we would watch it, because you know how it is. We do things and we think we're doing them right, and then when someone shows us, it's like, oh, well, I wasn't. So they didn't realize they were talking over one another, so they refined that. They didn't realize that they weren't speaking. These are second and third graders, by the way, a second and a third grader. They refined their presentation until eventually they got accepted for the National Invention League convention in Washington, D.C. So, but they used the technology in order to help them make their presentation better. Sorry. All right. So, other examples of what you can use for technologies, and people have talked about this, anyone uses, who is a Google district in here? Do we have some Google districts in here? So there are a lot of benefits to being a Google district, in that you can use, I mean, first off, it's free. Everyone in Pickerington had to take their Google certification test this year. So I think like 80% of our district is now Google certified. So I'm going to go ahead here. Sorry, I had to get through all this technology. Like I said, works well until it doesn't. And so why I like Google Docs is because, again, I did in Model United Nations with high school students, and I was only seeing them once a week. And we had certain things that were due. And so I needed to have a method of seeing their final product and then seeing how that final product was needed to be changed so I could give suggestions. So there we go. So what I would do, whoops, sorry, I just skipped one. Oh, here it is, right, sorry. And so in this case, this group did their, they had to produce a one-page resolution. So what I could do is, you can see on the side here, I could go and put comments that the students would have to resolve. And by putting the comment, it highlighted it for the students. So students could go out. I worked this final draft out with students when I was at the NAGC conference in Orlando, Florida. So because I had internet access and it was due by the end of that week and I was in Florida, we communicated through Google Docs in order to get it done in time. And they ended up going to the General Assembly. So they did a really good job with it. But we need to make some changes. So you can also do technology PD with whole staff. So this gentleman right here is Brian Seymour. He's our technology coordinator for Pickerington. I'm not going to show you the whole video, but I'll show you what he created here.
Hi everybody, this is Brian Seymour, Director of Instructional Technology with Pickerington Local School District. I'd like to welcome you to our first technology snapshot, where we'll do one of these every single week, and we will be showing off 3 apps that you can use on
He's a huge app fan, and he knows all these apps, and so he would show people new apps that they could use. So I'll show one example.
Growth in your classroom. So these 3 that we're going to do today, one will be on instructional, one will be on personal growth, and one will be on classroom management. So to get started with, the first app that we're going to talk about today is an app called EduCreations. This is the one right there in the middle. So with EduCreations, when you open it up, it's a simple whiteboard app that does some really kind of cool things that allows every single kid that has an iPad in the classroom to have a digital whiteboard in front of them.
All right, so that's an example. So he would set those out, and we would do those with the staff. All right. So I do want to give you guys some final parting words. I know it does that every time. When it comes to technology, the first thing would be learn from your students. Your students are learning the most recent things faster than you are, more than likely. I know whenever I have a problem with something, I always go to a student. If I have a technological problem, I go to a student and they are able to do it rather than the tech guys. So, you know, make sure you're learning from your students and what they have to offer. When they introduce something, if it's a good idea, introduce it to others or have them share it with others or have them use it with others. But definitely learn from your students. The second piece of advice is I would advise only choosing from 1 or 2 pieces of technology. And here's why. Because you want your kids to be familiar with it and able to use it well. If you introduce too much technology, they may be able to do all of them okay, but none of them great. And so I usually try to focus on just 1 or 2 pieces of technology. It changes every year what I'm going to be doing, but I try not to inundate them with too much different technology. I want them to get good at the technology they're using. Constantly reevaluate the technology. So when you are using technology, do you need to make changes? So, a good teacher is a reflective teacher. And there may be a better way to do it. There may be more, something more technologically advanced that would be better than what it is that you're doing. And so you can't be satisfied with what it is you're doing. You constantly have to reevaluate. Don't be content. That's why I showed this old computer. There's a saying, if you want to be on the cutting edge, don't sit down. So if you've gone 3 or 4 years using the same piece of technology, you might want to revisit that. Is there, do you want to do, because, studies show that kids, right now, the top 10 jobs that are available to college graduates right now didn't exist 5 years ago. So how do you get them ready for jobs that don't exist? Well, you teach them how to use technology and adapt to technology, and so that they can adapt to whatever technology comes about. And lastly is find a trusted source. So there are you can go to Twitter, you can have a colleague, you can go use or ask your technology department, but basically someone that you trust that can help you with the technology that they're doing. The tech guy I showed you before, he's always tweeting things, and you can go to the link and it shows you how to do it. So he's always trying to put things in people's hands, but he's a really good source. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. I'll end it on time. Thank you very much. I know people want to leave. Are there any questions about anything? I didn't think so.
Thanks, everybody. Jam-packed couple of days. I do